Two of my favorite stories from the New Testament, all on the same day. Well, we're going to do them both anyway. A question came to mind this week for the group of us who gather for Bible study on Tuesdays. And the question is, when does a disciple become an apostle? Now, we use those words interchangeably a lot, but they're really just a little bit different. Jesus calls the disciples, but when do they become apostles? So our first story this morning is that wonderful story about the conversion of St. Paul on the Damascus road when he is on his way to Damascus with letters from the leaders of the temple saying he can arrest anybody who is proclaiming Jesus' name and haul them right back to Jerusalem for trial. I don't know what they're going to do with them unless they can get the Romans to go ahead and crucify some more folks, but they're going to be arrested and tried. And along the way, he is struck off his horse, at least that's what all the artists tell us. And he falls to the road, and a beam of light comes down, and he hears that voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And he has enough sense to go, "Who are you, Lord?" He's pretty sure there's something lordly, godly about this, but he's just not quite sure. Because he's a good Pharisee. He was born and raised a Pharisee. He has worked all his life to be a good Pharisee. And good Pharisees know there is one God, and that God is Adonai, Yahweh, the Lord, the Father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so he just checking the waters here. And the voice answers with an answer he probably doesn't want to hear. "I'm Jesus." Oops. So he is blinded, and the soldiers who are with him lead him into the city, and they drop him off in some room somewhere and let him be. And he's there by himself for about 3 days. And then we have this wonderful character named Ananias come into the picture. This is like, that name becomes a good one at this point, because if you remember the last time you heard the word Ananias, I think he was a chief priest. And we're not talking about that Ananias. So Ananias is like John or Bob or something like that. Ananias has a vision of Jesus coming to him and saying, "There's this guy named Saul, and I need you to go over and take the scales off his eyes." And Ananias, a good disciple, says, "I've been hearing about this guy. Are you really sure he's okay with his eyes blinded? We're okay with that. He's kind of hungry, and we're okay with that too. And yet, really, you want me to bring him into the fold? Do you know what he's doing to your people?" And God says, "Yeah, I know. I've got better plans for him. Go to make him see again." And Ananias goes. Now, I would propose to you that that's when Ananias went from being a disciple to being an apostle. It's not that he didn't know Jesus. It's not that he didn't love Jesus before this moment. It's not that Jesus was not a part of his life. But by doing what Jesus, the Lord, has told him, commanded him to do, he has to say yes. It's in that yes that he releases his own desires, his own feelings, his own impressions of things, and goes with those of God. So he goes off to Paul, and he takes the scales from his eyes, and Paul is just a little bewildered. Paul stays bewildered, by the way, for about 2 or 3 years. We know that once he left Damascus, he hightailed it for the desert, and he stayed there and tried to figure out how he was supposed to be a Pharisee and a follower of Jesus. And could he get those two things together? And he did, sort of. And if you read the letters of Paul, you'll hear the progression of how that happened. But the end of our reading today says that he went into the synagogue and he proclaimed Jesus Christ. That's the start of his being an apostle. He'll grow into it. But that's the start. because clearly he has to have said yes. Then we come to this fabulous story from John, my absolute favorite part of John. The whole book is great, but this is my favorite part. Jesus has been appearing to the disciples a couple of times. You know that we had the first day when he appears to most of the disciples, and then he appears to Thomas later. And now they've been kind of without him for a week or so. He hasn't been around, and you know, they saw Jesus, but they're a little shaky because it's new. And you understand that. We all understand that, okay, we're going to go this way. I got to think about that a while. It would be really helpful if I had another sign. I love signs. They're so good. And it's not happening. And so Jesus, and I love the way you read this, Jenny. Jesus said, I'm going fishing. And they all said, yeah, great, we'll come too. Boys' day out. And off they go. And they spend all night fishing and nothing happens. And in the morning they look up and there's somebody on the beach and they're making breakfast. And this person calls out and says, you didn't catch anything, did you? And they say, no, we didn't. And he says, well, toss your nets over on the other side of the boat. See if there's anything over there. And the nets are so full that at most of the time they would have been breaking. And John, who is the one identified as the beloved disciple, turns to Peter and says, it's the Lord. And here comes my very favorite part. Peter says, oh my gosh, it is. And what does he do? He puts on his clothes to jump in the water. He is so excited. He is so excited, and he knows you just can't go see Jesus in your all together. That's just not right. You have to put on your clothes. So you put on your clothes and you jump in the water, go to the beach soaking wet, and fall down at his feet. And you know the story about Jesus asking him 3 times, does he love him? And each time he says yes, and the Lord says, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. And Peter's heart is kind of hurt by this because he's sure Jesus knows that he loves him. And there are those who will tell you that he does this 3 times because you remember what Peter did 3 times before Jesus' crucifixion. I do not know that man. I do not know that man. I'm not with him. I don't know that man. And the cock crowed. I won't do that for you. And at the end of our reading today, Jesus says to Simon Peter, follow me. And that's the moment Peter becomes an apostle. Because Peter has to give his whole self over to the Lord. He has to stop being Peter who just says, I'm going fishing. And be Peter who says, I'm going to feed the sheep. I'm going to take care of the lambs. I'm going to make sure the flock's okay. Because that's what Jesus would do if Jesus were here. Yesterday, I went out to St. Mark's Upper Arlington for the installation of their new rector and a celebration of their ministries together. And the bishop was preaching, and he gave the collect for the day, as I do every Sunday here. And there was a marvelous line in this collect. He was praying for the church, which is called that wonderful and sacred mystery. Now, brothers and sisters, that means that we are not just sitting in, but we are a wonderful and sacred mystery. So, when does the church go from being a disciple to being an apostle? We do that, of course, individually in our lives when we have a seminal moment, when we have to finally say yes, and put our own desires, devices, intentions, crazy thoughts, determination aside, and join up with God. So when do we do that as a church? And what does that look like? Well, I'm not sure I know exactly what that looks like, but I think it means being a little more like the apostles, a little less like the disciples. You remember the disciples, they argued about who was the best. They jumped out and said things and then couldn't back them up. You're the Messiah. Oh, no, you're not. You wouldn't do that if you were the Messiah. They tried to be Jesus. We're going to heal this boy with a demon. And they failed because they weren't Jesus. They watched the feeding of the 5,000 and scratched their heads wondering how the heck he did that. Wow, that was interesting. They were clueless a lot of the time. And a lot of the time they were still fishermen and tax collectors and whatever else they were in their previous lives, for they were not all fishermen, and only one of them was a tax collector. We don't know what the others did, but their lives kind of sort of went with them and informed how they thought and what they said and what they did and how they behaved. And then they had to say at some point, "Yes, Lord." I think that point for Thomas comes before the crucifixion, when they're going off to Bethany because Lazarus is dead. And they know that it's dangerous for Jesus to go that close to Bethlehem. And Jesus says he's going anyway, and Thomas says, well, then we'd all better go with him and die with him. If he's going to go, we need to go. That's an apostle moment, not a disciple moment. A disciple would say, well, you have a good trip, and tell me about it when you get home. But I'm here in prayer with you. I'm praying for you. I love you. This is good. An apostle says, best hit the road. Let's go. Not thinking about self, thinking about Jesus. St. Philip has that moment when he is sort of pulled into the scene that we have with the eunuch on his chariot who's reading the Bible. And Philip says, do you understand what you're reading? And the eunuch says, how can I do that? I'm not a teacher. And Philip says, well, let me tell you about that. Philip wasn't a scholar, but he jumped on board with the eunuch and he explained it to him. And when the eunuch said, there's some water, what's to keep me from being baptized? Philip said, absolutely nothing. And he jumped off and he baptized the eunuch. Eunuchs are not really clean, for Jewish people, and Philip was still probably a good Jew. But he did it anyway, because that's what God was calling him to do. That was his yes. Many people will tell you, many clergy will tell you, we that wear the funny collars and the clothes, will tell you that it's when we are called to be priests that we become apostles as opposed to disciples. And I will tell you that's not true. That is not true. Because saying yes to a call for a vocation is not the same as saying yes to the Lord. It's not the same as saying, my life is your life, and I will go where you lead me, and I will do what you tell me to do, and I will not get in your way. I may be your way for a while, but I will not get in your way. I will not preach my thoughts to heck with your thoughts. I will tell you what I need to tell you in prayer so that you can tell me what's next. I know you will give me the words when I need them. I will not sit and think to myself, now, what should I say here? I will trust that you will give me the words I need. I will trust you with my life. So, brothers and sisters, I'll do what one of my professors told me never to do and leave you with a rhetorical question. What is St. Philip going to do with its life? How is St. Philip, Episcopal Church, going to say yes?